It's Thursday, the 8th of March, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking.
It's International Women's Day today.
Is it?
Today.
It's today. It's the 8th of March.
Marvellous.
Which is why, as of this show, you're going to be paid equally, Alice, to what we get paid for doing this show.
Yeah, currently Alice gets like 80% of nothing.
Yes, yeah, which is higher than average. In fairness, she's not doing that badly. I mean, we're closer to an equal opportunities employer than many. It does mean you have to start pulling an equal amount of weight, but luckily Mike does a fuckload and I do very little, so you're probably already at that point anyway.
Yeah. Well, so as long as you both do very little, that's technically parity.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure that doesn't work out in my favour somehow.
Either that or Alice has to hit the average of what I do and you do in order to hold up the gender balance of what we've got on the show. That
still involves you doing next to nothing.
Funny that, isn't it?
It's odd that. It's fine. So with me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So, International Women's Day.
It is International Women's Day today.
I'm changing my name to Pink Marshall in celebration of International Women's Day, mainly to satirise the gendered marketing, but also a little bit to do some gendered marketing.
Okay.
Sorry, there was a story of...
a very oblique reference to a PR campaign that Mike probably hasn't heard about.
No.
But Brewdog, the brewer and pub and things.
Oh, I've seen Katie talking about this, where she's like, I could see you bought Pink.
In fairness, a lot of what they're doing is right. Like, if you...
I actually really like the campaign. They've clearly miscommunicated the campaign, but I really like the campaign. They've launched Pink IPA, which is exactly the same as their Punk IPA. It's exactly the same beer, but they've put it in a pink bottle. Which, pink, it's a bit of a shame. But because of the gender pay gap, they're giving 20% of proceeds from both their Punk and their Pink IPA to a women's charity. And for people who identify as women, they're giving 20% discount on beers in their bars.
Okay.
On just that one beer, isn't it?
It's not very clear from the article, but I think it's just on that one beer.
I think they're only giving 20% of the profit from Pink IPA.
No, it's both.
Oh, is it
definitely
both?
Pink and Punk.
Okay. I thought we would have been... It might have been smarter than just to give it from Pink IPA, but then they would have been giving less money.
Some people won't drink the pink one because...
Yeah, but then you mark yourself out as a prick.
You do.
Like, you are if you refuse to drink a beer because it's called pink or it's in a pink bottle, you're a bell end.
But people who drink Punk IPA in bars, unless you're in a bar that stocks Punk IPA in bottles, if you're drinking it in Brewdog, it's on tap.
Yeah.
The colour of the bottle makes no difference.
Yeah.
You don't say, I need to... I want the beer from the bottle and I specifically want it from the blue bottle. You're not going to mark yourself out as a prick either way.
Yeah. You'll know that you are ordering Punk IPA, not Pink IPA. Especially if the bar team were to say, do you want the Punk IPA or the Pink IPA that makes a donation to charity? And you still choose to do a Punk at that point, then I think it would force some men to confront what they think about the way things are marketed. And the Pink thing was also about gendered marketing of beers, which is a thing.
And that they're particularly frustrated that, and this is something that probably is it's. I don't think it's a case of Brewdog jumping on something that will get them money and sales and stuff, because they are the kind of company that does care about giving beer to everybody and that it's accessible and that they, if you go in as a woman who doesn't drink beer very often and say, well, I don't know anything about beer, they'll come and they'll ask you what you like and try and figure out a beer that you can drink or that you like.
It's an amazing corporate mission statement to make beer accessible for everyone.
Beer accessible for all.
Someone did point out that if they wanted to go for like a punk pun and a feminism angle, instead of being Pink IPA, it should have been Emmeline Punkhurst.
Which
would have been really good. Although I guess
and then they probably wouldn't have had to go for Pink.
They wouldn't have gone for, they shouldn't have gone for Pink, yeah. But it's so I think if you read what they were intending to do, I think it makes some good sense. But clearly, having to read what they're intending to do means their marketing has failed. Because most people have gone, oh, you've released a pink bottle and it says for girls on the side. Oh, you're just big sexist. It's like, well, sort of, but not really, but also sort of a bit.
Yeah.
We're kind of going to come back to a similar example of this later in the show.
Are we now? Okay. Nice. Well, we'll do that, shall we? I got back today from Southampton. I went to do a talk for the Southampton Humanists. Takes me, train to Southampton, that's a long way. That's a long old way from Liverpool.
Yeah.
It's like a 5 hours or something like that. Yeah, that was I've not got any more interesting to say than that, other than I was on the train for quite a while. But I got to. The weird thing was, I was doing my Adventures in Pseudoscience talk.
You're lifting the lid.
Exactly,
yes.
Yeah. And I've done that talk maybe 30 times, something in that kind of area. But I haven't done it really for about 2 years, maybe something like that.
Yes.
And so there were large segments that I'd get to it and go, oh, yeah, this story. In my head, I'm thinking, right, this story. I'd go into it and be like, oh, I don't know the next bit of that story. Oh, and there's a really important detail of this.
What's the point of this story?
Not even what's the point? It's like, oh, I'll tell this story about a horrible thing a psychic once said. So, and I'll say. And so there was this one time that I saw the person, and to a lady in the audience, she said, fuck, I can't remember what she said. And I need to know the wording of it because it was horrible, and this is the entire crescendo of this part of the anecdote, so the wording is quite important. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. It was fine all in the end, but there were a couple of hairy moments where I was like, if I just keep saying words, I'll either say the right ones, or I'll realise why the ones I'm saying are wrong, and by a process of elimination and deduction, get to the right ones, which is what that was. But
so you're just filling your own material until you can remember your own material, like you've pushed yourself onto stage and say vamp while I figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I've done. And the weird thing is, I had a similar experience when I was in Sheffield the week before, because every year I lecture for the universities there on journalism and PR, and then I do Sunderland doing it next week, in fact. And I had a similar experience where I'm telling, like, the Clarkson's cock story. And there's turns of phrases that I'd worn to a point where they were horned and sharp, and I was just forgetting them. I was like, oh, God, there's definitely something about a cock in all of this. And having to sort of, like, put an extra few words in the sentence to remember what the gag that you were getting towards was, yeah. It's an interesting experience.
So how was Southampton?
You know, I didn't get to see a lot of it because I arrived there at like 5:30.
Because you normally go woo shopping when you go to a new city, don't you?
I do, but I didn't have the chance this time because it was quite far away. But it was fine. It seemed absolutely fine. I went up towards the university campus, which is the good thing about Southampton is it's a very technical science university, and they've got a good maths department. And it's their maths department that sponsors the Who Wants to Be a Mathematician competition that Good Thinking runs.
For Good Thinking, yes.
So they gave us a chunk of money to help run that competition. So it was nice to kind of go back and actually mention that was pretty good. So yeah, they were nice people.
We went to see comedian, musician.
I think he'd go musician first. I mean, if he were to hear what you were saying, he'd probably describe himself as a musician first and foremost, but with an edge of
certainly with a comedy twist,
a warm tinged comic edge to him. Yeah, Gavin Osborne.
Yeah, was who we saw on Tuesday last week. Was it last week? Was it the week before now?
It was the week before because today's Tuesday. Last week.
Today is Tuesday. So we went to see him.
He's good, Gavin Osborne. I like him. I've seen him a few times.
We had him at QED.
We had him at QED last year. I saw him performing with Daniel Kitson before that. He was great
on the Kitson tour. Yeah,
I like him.
Well, I saw him at we saw him at Indie Tracks as well.
We did.
And so I've
crammed in a tiny little train.
And he was desperately hungover as well, if I remember rightly. He was like painfully hungover at the time. But the thing is, so I've seen there's one particular song he has about a chap called Albert who goes out to see rock bands.
Yes, I don't know the song.
I've seen it about 3 or 4 times. Every single time I cry. Every single time it makes me cry.
It's a brilliant
without
song.
fail. It's like,
song.
I know the lines that are coming up now. No, I know exactly what's coming up, and I'm crying. Every fucking time. But yeah, he was really good in 81 Renshaw Street.
It was very good, and the audience really liked him and were really on side, which is always nice. Yeah.
So if anyone has the chance to see Gavin Osborne, they definitely should. We're starting to do like recommendations on this show occasionally because we've recommended like comedians to see, we recommended musicians to see. When we had the conversation in the last episode about people whose work you find it hard, whether them being a bit dodgy influences their work at all, which it turned out was a remarkably prescient conversation we're having. I can't imagine why we'd be having a conversation about can you still like someone even if you find out horrible things about their personal life and how they might not be the best of people. Can you still like their work? I don't know why we're talking about this. We actually weren't talking about it for any particular reason other than someone asked us it months ago.
The question came in.
Yeah. But I mentioned Giant Drag, and one of the things we got back in feedback, or was one of the comments somewhere, was like, this might seem a bit lowbrow. I did enjoy the show, but I want to say thanks for recommending Giant Drag. They're fucking brilliant. I was like, yeah, they are brilliant. And Annie Hardy is unfortunately a massive woo, and it's heartbreaking, but it could be worse. It could be worse. She could have done far, far worse things.
That's true.
That people would have to reconcile themselves with understanding that the work is perhaps still respectable, but the author of the work absolutely is not.
So that was the first gig we had, and then we went on the Friday to see another gig of a band that we'd also discovered at Indie Tracks.
Well, we tried to double gig the Friday.
We did try to double gig.
We tried for an ambitious double gigging
because one of the support acts for Gavin Osborne was this beautiful singer from Camilla Sky.
Yeah, from Norway.
Well, I think she actually lives in Liverpool.
Yeah, she does, but she was definitely Norwegian.
Very Norwegian. She was a beautiful singer, and she was performing with her band the next day at an event at Leaf, which is right on the parallel street to 81 Renshaw Street, which was the other place we were going for a different gig that night that we already had tickets for. So we tried to double gig and go to one first and the other one, which we successfully did. We went to Leaf first and we saw a couple of the acts there, but we didn't get to see Camilla Sky.
We saw some pretty average acts there. We saw one guy who kept interrupting his set to ask the audience to shut up. Which, I mean, it's an open mic night, but you're not like headlining an open mic night, and it's in quite a big place. So there's kind of an understanding, I think, to a degree, that if you don't grab the attention of the crowd, they're going to start chatting a little bit, because it's not like it's in a tiny little room. It was Leaf, it was the upstairs Leaf, which is massive.
Room,
But he was attempting to wrestle back control of the crowd by berating them. And didn't you say the last thing he said as he walked off stage, "Thanks very much, could you shut up, please?" and walked off or something like that? So, wow, way to go out on a high, guys. Yeah.
So we did that, and then we went across the road to see the band that we'd wanted to see, that we'd planned to see, that we bought tickets for a few weeks before, which was a band called Penis, who we saw at Indie Tracks.
Yes, and you had a sticker on your phone.
I had a sticker on my phone for a while I've now got a new phone case that said Penis, Peaness.
You're very deliberately saying that Penis.
Yeah.
That's how they pronounce it.
Do they? Or have they just got slightly Chester accents?
That's how they pronounced it when they introduced themselves, and it's also how they pitch themselves in blurbs and things.
Because it's about how pee-ish something is.
Yeah, the level of pee.
The level of pee.
Penis.
Not like the level of pee like a public swimming baths. It's not that kind of level of pee, but yeah.
They were really good, but had slight issues with the audience in the room.
Oh God!
There was a group of, I don't know how many people there were, maybe somewhere between 7 and 15 people.
Yeah, just like
kind of merging in and out of groups, almost shouting, like talking loud, trying to talk loud enough that they could hear themselves over the gig in the back of the room. Really, really loudly, really off-putting. I don't actually think the band could hear them.
No, they could. No, they 100% could, because they kept looking over at them.
I thought they were complaining about other things.
They were also complaining about how the audio was terribly set up.
The sound wasn't great.
Appalling feedback.
But despite all of that, they were still really good, and we hope they come back to Liverpool. But
despite those 11 plus or minus 4 people.
Yes.
Despite that sort of 15% of the audience.
They did have multiple support acts who we didn't see anything of.
No, but we heard bits of them. We thought, no, I don't want to see any of them. I don't need to see anything of them.
So, they were really good. And then, so that was on the Friday. And then on the Saturday, we all congregated really, really early. And we went to see the Terracotta Warriors.
Yeah, the Liverpool World Museum, which I thought was quite cool.
We did go and see the Terracotta Warriors. We decided in advance that terracotta is best in a Geordie accent.
It is.
We're going to see the Terracotta Warriors.
Terracotta, aye, champion.
It was quite tricky to organise because there were 18 of us, which is a lot of people.
It is.
And a lot of our people are really bad at communicating.
I mean, it was also slightly tricky to organise in that you were handing the tickets out to people. You gave your ticket to Warren to hold on to, and then you were confused as to why there were too few tickets.
No, I wasn't confused as to why there were too few tickets. I ended up with an extra ticket.
Oh, yeah, because you hadn't given someone a ticket.
I hadn't given Laurie a ticket.
Yeah. But Laurie had brought copies of all the tickets. And then you started looking to whether the copies of the tickets were getting out. I was like, just stop everything. Stop it. Why is this hard? You have a piece of paper, you try and get in the end. Yeah. But they were all right, weren't they?
It was good.
I enjoyed the Terracotta Warriors. I was not over enthralled by the massive Chinese propaganda video that we had to watch.
Oh, that was great. You were allowed in without seeing literally a propaganda video.
They locked you in a room.
Yeah, they locked you in a room. And one of the lines of the video was like, all cultures are thriving in China. I was like, fucking hell, do you want to strap us down and hold our eyes open Ludovico technique style while we're at it?
So we did that, but then the Terracotta Warriors themselves, I thought, were quite good. They were
really, really interesting. It was really interesting and overwhelming and incredible.
Well, they were incredibly old, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
They all had their hands were all posed in a series of hand job movements.
Yes, because they were all supposed to be holding weapons.
Presumably they were
holding weapons.
holding spears and things which would have been made of wood, and so they've long since perished.
But it just looked like they were all preparing to give.
But it does just like they're all
ghostly hand jobs,
like masturbating. Hundreds, big lines of them. All standing there doing it. But the detail and the age of them, and like they were right there. We could, in principle, have like reached out and touched them, and
we wouldn't have done because we're not American,
and we didn't.
No, we could have done the American thing of breaking off one of their thumbs and taking it.
Did that happen?
Yeah,
good God!
Someone snapped a finger off.
Yeah, it's like how many thousand years old or however old it's meant to be.
Oh, good Lord!
Snap the bloody finger off.
And I thought it was great that's because obviously that kind of shit would usually wind up in London.
Yeah. And
I thought it was nice.
Usually in the British Museum. Usually it would go there and it would never come back out again.
But I thought it was nice that, I think it was the decision of the Chinese government as well, as they said they wanted it to go to Liverpool, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was good because I think Liverpool's home of one of the oldest Chinese communities in Europe.
Yeah. It's got the biggest Chinese arch outside of China.
Which is the oldest community, not the community of the oldest Chinese people in Europe.
I mean, it could be both.
It might be both. There might be like several.
I don't know. We are cancer capital of Europe, or we were.
We were the cancer capital of Europe. I hear that change recently. Yeah.
So I'd recommend if people are able to go and see the Terracotta Warriors. I thought it was really good.
They're here. They're in Liverpool until October. They're really, really cool.
I did struggle at one point where there was a display of a door to a tomb, like a door to a tomb, right towards the end of the exhibition, and the caption at the bottom talked about how this door had two massive knockers. And I just lost it.
Of course you did.
Giggling like schoolboy.
Yeah.
Two massive knockers. But yeah, go and see the Terracotta Warriors. They were very good. Fairly early in my time as an active skeptic, I learned how easy it is to accidentally piss people off.
You only learned that once you became an active skeptic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now, personally, I think that there is an objective reality with which I interact, and that my understanding of that objective reality is limited. I also believe that the closer my understanding is to the reality, the more likely it is that I'm going to be able to make good decisions with predictable consequences. The better my understanding of the world, the more likely it is that when I take an action, the thing that I'm trying to make happen will happen, and the things that I don't want to happen won't happen to a greater or lesser extent. It also means that it is in my interests to learn about the world that I live in and adapt my ideas when I discover which things that I believe do not comport with that reality. Ignorance is many things, but I don't usually think bliss is one of them. Ignorance leads to bad decisions, and I don't want to be making bad decisions. But some people don't agree with me on that one. Some people deny the reality because they prefer the more comfortable ideas that they already have in their heads.
Really? And I wonder what your story's about this week.
And I found out the hard way, as I'm sure many skeptics have, that being disabused of comfortable ideas is not something people will always thank you for.
Well, all you need, Mike, is just more evidence. You know, you can't just take someone's word for it. You can't just take one eyewitness from it. You can't just take
50
three eyewitnesses. You can't take the word of two educational institutions or the policies they've enacted, because you don't know. You weren't there. You need to have been there. You need to wait until the police.
It hasn't been found in a court of law.
Exactly, because what of due process, Mike? What of due process?
It is a well-known fact that unless a police report was filed, a crime did not happen.
Yeah,
that is definitely a fact.
And it's a well-known fact that if something doesn't pass the level of a crime, it's fine. It's fine.
Everything that is legal is therefore acceptable.
Anything not a crime is absolutely fine to do from a position of power and authority to an audience of adulating people.
Okay.
But
I've had friends raising money for bogus treatments for incurable genetic conditions furious at me when I point out the facts to them, like, this is a bogus treatment for an incurable genetic condition, as if the treatment would have worked if I hadn't mentioned anything, but now that I've said it, I've ruined it for everyone.
Yeah.
So I very quickly learned to hold my tongue in most circumstances, and instead I focused on making passive-aggressive remarks on a popular bi-weekly podcast instead. The American comedian Adam Conover, on the other hand, took the disappointment that skeptics can sometimes engender in people, and he ran with it, creating the TV series and podcast Adam Ruins Everything, in which Adam disabuses people of common misconceptions, clubbing them over the head energetically with the truth to their initial disappointment but eventual gratitude.
Which is very different from Adam Ruins Everything, which is the show he had before that, where he would divine the future by using ancient stones. It wasn't as popular.
A few weeks ago, Adam did an episode of his podcast titled The Surprising Power of Placebos, in which he interviews Dr. Catherine Hall. Quality surname.
What is
great
it with
first
Halls?
name as well. It's my mum's first name.
Good.
It's about the same way as well.
And a doctor as well. So 3 out of 3. She's doing okay here.
What is it with Halls and the placebo effect? Do you know that Hall soothers don't actually work? They just make you think they work.
Catherine Hall is from the Harvard Medical School program in placebo studies. And of course, as the placebo guy, I think literally every human being on the planet sent this to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, no, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think half of them did, and the other half went, I bet he fucking talks about this. I bet he's going to do a piece on this, isn't he?
Any initial hopes I might have had about Adam ruining the placebo effect were short-lived, as the coverage, unfortunately, was wide of the mark. As you put it on Twitter, Marsh, this episode would perhaps have been more appropriately titled Adam Ruins Mike's Blood Pressure. Before I get to the podcast interview specifically, I wanted to talk briefly about a short video clip titled The Magic of the Placebo Effect, which Adam published on his YouTube channel last October. This clip, I think, is an excerpt from the TV episode Adam Ruins Spa Day. Yeah. So Adam Ruins Everything is a TV show on a station called True TV, which I don't know if that's an online station or a transmitter station or a cable station or what, but it's a TV show that he does for True TV. And he also has a podcast of the same title that he does content for as well. Adam Ruins Spa Day was one of his TV episodes, and it was mostly about how the stuff you get at the spa is woo. Was basically the bulk of that episode. But a short segment of that episode was about the placebo effect, and he pulled that out and published it as a standalone piece on his YouTube channel titled The Magic of the Placebo Effect. In the video, Adam says, the placebo effect is far stronger than most people think. New studies are finding it can do such incredible things, it's almost like magic.
I mean, come on, that's fine. I mean, it's not, but he doesn't actually mean it's magic. That's TV rhetoric.
The clip continues. In one study, scientists gave a group of asthma patients an inhaler with real medicine and compared them to another group of patients that were given placebos. After the treatment, all groups reported about a 50% improvement. As this voiceover is going on, we see two people sitting at a desk, both using inhalers. One of their inhalers is marked medicine, and the other one is marked just air.
Classic, yep. And bit on the nose, but fine.
After having used the inhalers, both of them look up and look to the presenter and give a thumbs up, give a nice big thumbs up for how much better they're feeling after their inhalers, even though one of them is just air.
It's just air. I like the way in some of those types of segments on shows like that, they basically take on the same level of nuance and subtlety as a political cartoon. It's like, you've got to just label everything as well. It's like you might as well have had one of the inhalers labeled democracy, another one labeled China's one-child policy. It's that kind of that's a bit thrown together, but fine.
Now, I've talked about this study on the show before. Patients were randomized into 4 groups: no treatment, real inhaler, fake inhaler, and of course, acupuncture.
Inhaling those needles was an absolute bastard.
Turns out the reason acupuncture is in the study is because the lead author, Ted Kapchuk, is a former acupuncturist.
Ted Kapchuk, that name rings a bell. I've got a feeling I'm going to hear that name again at some point.
But Ted Kapchuk also, it turns out, is Catherine Hall's boss and, as she describes it, mentor and head of Harvard's program in placebo studies.
Yeah, he's head of the program in placebo studies. To be accepted to the program in placebo studies, you need to click the boxes that contain a street sign and then enter the text as it appears in the image. Oh, no, it was Ted Kapchuk who put that in place.
Okay.
You looked at me like you had no idea where I was
had
going
no
with
idea
that.
where you were going with that.
Oh, man, maybe I've gone too far off piste. Fine.
The results showed that patients using fake inhalers and real inhalers reported a near identical improvement, provided the outcome measure was asking the patients if they thought their breathing had improved. When their lung function was directly measured, it turns out the placebo effect did stuff all. Now, citing this study as evidence for a powerful magical placebo effect, I think is grossly irresponsible and arguably dangerous. Writing for Science-Based Medicine in 2011, which is when the asthma study was first published, David Gorski said, if a case of asthma is severe enough, a patient could be walking on a proverbial tightrope where all it would take is a small insult to push them over into a life-threatening asthma exacerbation. But if lung function in an asthmatic is tuned up as well as it can be, it will have a lot farther to deteriorate to reach that dangerous point. Let's not forget that asthma can and does kill. Choosing alternative medicine over effective asthma treatment because placebo responses lead to feeling better without altering the underlying illness could very well lead to preventable asthma deaths. Now, in the interest of being fair to Adam Ruins Everything, the clip goes on to ask if that means that air is a miracle drug. No, says Adam, there was no physical effect on their bodies, but the placebo made them feel as if they could breathe better.
Yeah. There's no real evidence for that, but it is scientific fact.
Problem is, when you're an asthmatic, feeling like you can breathe better is not good enough, or even necessarily a good thing at all. There is an underlying and potentially fatal medical condition here which kills nearly 250,000 people a year worldwide. Convincing someone that they feel better when actually you've done nothing to them at all is not necessarily the right thing to be doing in this circumstance. Now, the YouTube segment ends there, but Adam goes into far more depth during his podcast interview with Catherine Hall. But unfortunately, the interview is conducted with the same credulous tone and eager support for the magical placebo narrative. Catherine starts by saying to Adam, there is a growing problem in biopharma and clinical trials where it's getting more and more hard to beat the placebo response. And this is costing the investors in pharma billions of dollars, and it's leaving patients without treatments.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's an astonishing statement from Catherine Hall. It's getting harder to beat the placebo response, and this is costing pharmaceutical companies billions of dollars and leaving patients without treatments.
Yeah.
Well, no.
It's leaving them without treatments that aren't better than the placebo, treatments that don't work.
If your drug doesn't do better than placebo, we shouldn't be giving it to patients anyway. If it doesn't do better than placebo, that means it doesn't work. That's what we do the test for. It's not a problem with placebos being too strong. If it's a problem at all, it's a problem to do with novel drugs not working very well. When we do a clinical trial, we are looking to test the specific effect of a novel intervention, and nothing more than that. The reason we have a control group in a clinical trial is to try and capture as many other effects as possible, biases, regressions, learned responses, etc., so we can subtract them from the effect seen in the active treatment group and confidently attribute what's left to the specific effect of the drug. That it is getting harder to beat placebo says only that we're getting better at capturing these non-specific effects within our control groups. One possible reason for this might be better trial design and better enforcement of trial protocols. This is actually a good thing for patients because without rigorous trials, we would see drugs coming through clinical trials due to false positives. Patients in the active treatment group were improving, but not because of the specific effect of the intervention. Rather, it was something else going on in the trial that we hadn't accounted for properly, and so wasn't being measured in the control group. And that means when the same intervention is then used by doctors in a clinical setting, it doesn't have the same effect.
The classic example, or a classic example of that being the study you talked about where placebos could influence stomach ulcers. And one of the confounders that they might not have controlled for was whether people were also taking antibiotics at the time. Yeah, which is why it works better in Germany.
Catherine then goes on to talk about placebo effects in surgical interventions. There have been 2 notable studies recently, she said, where the surgical procedure failed to beat the placebo sham surgery. In the case of the most recent study on shoulder surgeries, a lot of people have these bone spurs that can develop on the shoulder, and they will do arthroscopic interventions where they go in and they use a scope to see where they can remove these growths and clean up the area. And in some cases, they do some modest repairs. In the sham surgery, they go in, they scope it, they just don't do anything. Adam then asks her, and when they do that, they find that in some cases the placebo surgery is as strong or beats the real surgery? Is that what you're saying? It doesn't beat it, says Catherine. There was no statistically significant difference between the sham and the real surgery. Wow, says Adam. That goes way beyond what I think most people think of the placebo effect as being capable of. So, of course, I went to look for this paper. This was a paper which was published in The Lancet last November and was titled Arthroscopic Subacromial Decompression for Acromial Shoulder Pain, a Multi-Center Pragmatic Parallel Group Placebo-Controlled 3-Group Randomized Surgical Trial.
Gotcha.
That's a lot of commas.
That is a lot.
in a paper title.
Yeah, they got all that shoulder damage by carrying around printouts of the title.
Patients from 32 hospitals across the UK who'd reported shoulder pain for at least 3 months were randomised into 3 groups. The patients had all previously completed a non-operative management programme, including exercise therapy and steroids. Patients were also excluded if they had a torn rotator cuff, whatever a rotator cuff is. But if it was torn, you were excluded from this study.
Is it just because it's a ball socket joint thing? So it's the.
But I'm not an anatomist.
No.
The first group consisted of 106 patients. They were assigned to receive decompression surgery. This is where they insert a scope into the shoulder and reshape the shoulder blade by removing material, including bone spurs. Group B consisted of 103 patients. They were assigned to receive arthroscopy only. This is where the scope is inserted into the shoulder, but no other procedure is performed while you're in there. And Group C was given no treatment. They were told they were on the waiting list for an operation, but they never actually got to have the surgery.
Bastards.
Yeah. Well, that's how they do these no treatment trials, basically, is you have a waiting list group, effectively.
And they wait forever.
Yeah, they wait until the trial's over.
Did they tell him that the surgeon's called Godot? Honestly, he'll be back any minute. He'll sort your shoulder out then. You guys just have a sit down. There's a donkey coming somewhere.
The primary outcome measure was the Oxford Shoulder Score. You'll never guess what that is.
Self-reported.
It is a self-reported questionnaire. Conducted 6 months after the randomization, with secondary outcome measures being the Oxford Shoulder Score at 12 months, and also other measures including a modified constant Murley shoulder score. Now, the constant Murley shoulder score, I think, includes a measurement of function within a clinical setting, so not just patient self-report data. There is patient self-report data in it, but I think it contains an actual investigation in a clinical setting where they're testing function. Now, I'm not 100% sure that the modified constant Murley shoulder score contains a measurement of function in a clinical setting. The constant Murley shoulder score does contain that assessment, but the paper says they are using a modified constant Murley shoulder score, but doesn't say in what respect they modified it. They could have modified it by skipping out all the objective measurements and just using the self-report data. I have no idea. Regardless, the results showed that there was no statistically significant difference between the arthroscopy and decompression groups. So there was no difference between the sham surgery and the real surgery. Both were better than no treatment, though the no treatment group did show some improvement as well, so that's probably an effective regression to the mean or natural history or whatever. Catherine Hall cites this as an example of the amazing power of the placebo effect, amazing enough for Adam to cry, wow, when she describes the results of this study. The authors of this study, on the other hand, say the findings question the value of this operation for these indications and should be communicated to patients during the shared treatment decision-making process.
Jesus.
So the paper itself is, our evidence shows that this operation is a waste of time. We should probably let patients know that the evidence for this operation isn't great when we're discussing the informed consent.
Yeah.
But the placebo fans are... saying, wow, look how amazing placebos are. As we saw with a very similar knee surgery study, which I assume is the other surgical study she's talking about when she said there's been 2 surgical studies recently.
Almost certainly. It's huge in the field, isn't it?
Yeah. There is the pacemaker one knocking about as well, but I presume it's not that one.
That's older as well, whereas this one is specifically about surgery. But as we saw with a very similar knee surgery study that we talked about in episode 186, what is lauded by fans of the placebo narrative as a win for the magical power of placebos is an actual fact study which shows that the intervention is a waste of time. But Mike, you might say.
But Mike!
Both the sham and real surgery were better than no treatment.
Better than no treatment.
So surely that means the fake surgery did improve something.
Something.
Well, yes and no. From the paper, surgical groups had better outcomes for shoulder pain and function compared to the no treatment group, but this difference was not clinically important. So although the surgery groups were statistically better than no treatment, this doesn't translate to any meaningful clinical outcome. The patients are technically better on paper, but practically it makes very little difference to their condition. But Mike, you might say.
I'm not.
That's still a difference. So the placebo did something, even if it was a small thing. It did something, Mike. It did something.
It did something, Mike. It did. I know. I was there. You weren't there, Mike. You weren't there. You can't just take the paper's word for it. You didn't see it with your own eyes, and therefore you can dismiss anything you don't want to be true.
Again, from the paper, the difference between the surgical groups and no treatment might be the result of, for instance, a placebo effect, or of the post-operative physiotherapy.
What?
Turns out that following surgery, patients in both the sham and surgical groups were given physiotherapy.
But the waitlisted people...
The waitlisted people didn't, because obviously they were receiving post-surgical physiotherapy that was meant to help their shoulder recover from the surgery.
Yeah.
And that might be what's responsible for the still minor improvement that we see in the sham group compared to no treatment.
So it's like, it's either placebo's magic or physiotherapy does something.
Yeah, and that's literally what the paper says, is the difference could be, for instance, a placebo effect or the post-operative physiotherapy.
Jesus.
What Adam Conover declares as a much stronger effect than I thought actually turns out to be a clinically irrelevant, if statistically significant, difference from no treatment, which can be explained by a parallel intervention, that being post-operative physiotherapy.
And in fairness, I mean, the reason he's claiming that is because that's what he's been told.
That's what he's been told, absolutely,
as an expert. It's kind of, it's not quite Gish-Gallopy type stuff, but it's a similar kind of thing of throw out something in a conversation that when you go away and research the details of does not hold up.
Yeah.
But in the moment you can't. Even if you're inclined to challenge that, it didn't sound like Adam was because of the narrative that he had been convinced of.
Catherine Hall, who presumably has read this paper in full,
shouldn't be cited,
does very little to disabuse Adam of that misconception. Yeah. He's saying, "Oh, does it mean this?" And she goes, "Yeah, it does." You know, when actually the paper says nothing of the sort. Now that's just the first 10 minutes of an hour-long interview between Adam Conover and Dr. Catherine Hall. There's plenty more that they talked about, and I'm sure I'm going to have more to say about this in future episodes.
A couple of years ago, when we went to Edinburgh Fringe Festival, we befriended comedian, archaeologist, podcaster, and all-round good guy Paul Duncan McGarity.
I mean, he was an all-round good guy, but he's been starting a lot of fights recently online.
He has been starting fights with castles online.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, it's pretty much the epitome of punching up. if you're having a go at something that's got an actual moat and a series of turrets and those little slats that allow you to fire arrows out of, whose name I don't know, but he probably will know.
He'll let us know, I'm sure he will.
Unless you're the Incredible Hulk, you're not going to win the fight against the castle.
No.
Oh, yeah.
The same year, we also went to see a show by a lovely Danish comedian, Sophie Hagen.
We
did go and see Sophie Hagen, yes.
So it seems particularly fitting that it was Paul who drew our attention to Sophie making a splash in the media just recently. Paul sends a link to a Telegraph article about Sophie's criticism of a Cancer Research UK campaign, the headline reading, "Award-winning comedian accuses Cancer Research of fat-shaming for launching campaign against obesity."
Yeah.
On Twitter, she had said, "Right, is anyone currently working on getting this piece of shit Cancer Research UK advert removed from everywhere? Is there something I can sign? How the fucking fuck is this okay?" The advert she had shared was part of a 4-week campaign from Cancer Research UK. The full advert is a poster designed to look like a plain-fronted cigarette packet, where the brand name is replaced with OB_S__Y. Like the hangman, fill in the letters type game. And then it says underneath that is a cause of cancer, and the typical warning label that you see on a cigarette packet is replaced with the words, "Guess what is the biggest preventable cause of cancer after smoking?" Along with the Cancer Research UK strapline, "Let's beat cancer sooner," and the Cancer Research UK logo.
It's a very plain ad as well, isn't it? It's
very simple,
very,
plain.
very stark. To resemble that legally mandated cigarette packaging.
Yes. As part of the campaign, Cancer Research UK are sharing their webpage on obesity, weight and cancer, and have made available a PDF of FAQs, which has a load of information on the campaign and their reasoning. Their campaign timeline shows they have 2 weeks of out-of-home marketing, posters at bus stops and other places, 4 weeks worth of radio, digital, social and print advertising, and a week where they push the press story, followed by a week of a PR stunt. The PR stunt that they're doing, and I think it's this week that this episode goes out, involves them handing out chips inside a cigarette packet using the same image as the poster on the cigarette packet.
Yeah.
And they've also been sharing photos of the cigarette packet with chips inside. Now, this is quite a complicated story to tackle because there's the science on obesity and cancer to discuss, the Cancer Research UK campaign itself, and the public response to this campaign. So starting with the science, we've talked before on the show that carrying excess weight is a risk factor for developing cancer, and I pointed out last episode, in fact, that we're not entirely sure why. So now I have some more of the facts on that. Research has told us that 42% of cancer cases in the UK are preventable by lifestyle changes. Almost 20% of all cancers can be prevented by being smoke-free. And then after that, 5% of cancers can be prevented by keeping a healthy weight. And almost 5% can be prevented by eating fruit and vegetables. Other factors include how much alcohol we drink, our exposure to sun, processed red meat, salt and fibre in the diet, and our physical activity. But the top two things you can do to prevent cancer are to not smoke and to keep a healthy weight. The two are in different leagues. 20% versus 5%. But 5% of all cancer diagnoses in a year is still a reasonably large number of around 20,000 people. Large cohort studies consistently show that higher body fat levels are associated with an increased risk of some cancer types. According to the NIH, people who are overweight or obese are twice as likely to develop kidney, liver, gastric cardia, endometrial cancers, and esophageal adenocarcinoma. That's twice as likely. There is a 10 to 30%, depending on the type, increased risk of developing multiple myeloma, meningioma, colorectal, gallbladder cancer, ovarian cancer, and thyroid cancer, and a 20 to 50% increased risk of developing breast or pancreatic cancer. So while it's clear that high body fat levels are associated with increased cancer risk from multiple studies across many, many years, it's not entirely clear why. But there are a few proposed mechanisms. One thing associated with carrying excess body weight is an increased level of inflammation in the body, which can cause DNA damage and lead to cancer. But it can also lead to or be indicative of other health problems which are also associated with an increased risk of some types of cancer. For example, obesity can increase your risk of gallstones, and a history of gallstones is a risk factor for gallbladder cancer. So it might be indicative of two things related in an indirect way rather than a direct cause. Another key point that seems to be what a few different groups that I've looked at put forward as potentially the most important issue is that adipose tissue or fat tissue isn't just a collection of fat. It's a collection of cells which store the fat.
Yes, of course, right, So,
which means fat cells or adipocytes do lots of things that cells do. If you have more fat tissue, you have fat cells that are doing something differently. The big one is that they produce an awful lot. It's one of our biggest sources of hormones in the body. They produce adipose tissue produces a lot of hormones and growth factors as well. And both of these have been implicated in a whole host of different cancer types. For example, high estrogen levels have been implicated in the development of breast, endometrial, and ovarian cancer. And we know that adipose tissue does produce a lot of estrogen. Similarly, obesity is related to increased levels of insulin and insulin-like growth factor, and they're both associated with both obesity and cancers such as colon, kidney, prostate, and endometrial cancers. So there's a few potential mechanisms, in addition to there might be lifestyle factors that are more important in developing cancer and increasing your risk of cancer that are also associated with people carrying extra weight. But we know that in some way it's definitely linked.
Sure.
That's what the science says. And the science, of course, comes without any judgment. The science proves a link between obesity and cancer, but we also know that infection with Helicobacter pylori can cause cancer. Exposure to UV light can cause cancer, and exposure to wood dust can cause cancer. But we typically don't judge people for being joiners or tanned or for getting stomach ulcers. The judgment and body shaming comes from outside of the science. So then the question is, what was the intention behind the Cancer Research UK campaign, and did they consider how to minimise offence? Have they just been careless, or have they really put some thought into it? So going back to their FAQ PDF, the purpose in this campaign is to raise awareness of the link between cancer and obesity. So research has shown that only 15% of people are aware that there's a link between obesity and cancer, which is a tiny number. And in particular, Cancer Research UK believe that increasing public awareness will enable the charity to, in their own words, lobby the government and food industry to make changes so it's easier for everyone to make healthy choices. And for me, the key words here are easier and choices.
Yeah.
Cancer Research UK do not aim to force people to change their diet. They just want to make the choice easier. They also add that for some people, increased awareness may also trigger them to make healthy lifestyle choices for themselves and their families. But again, with the emphasis on some people and choices. But their main goal is policy change, which is evidenced in the fact that part of their public awareness campaign, you might have seen in the media recently, Cancer Research UK are also working to encourage the introduction of a watershed for junk food advertising, which has already been restricted on kids' TV. They just want to extend this restriction to a similar watershed to the swearing watershed, so at 9 o'clock. Again, not to restrict access to or availability of food choices, nor even to shame people who make those choices, but to minimise the targeted advertising, which their research suggests is important in helping particularly children to avoid unhealthy foods. But the most important indication of Cancer Research UK's intention is in the language that they use across this entire campaign. In fact, Cancer Research UK have been very careful about the language that they use. They did a pilot for the campaign in the West Midlands last year, and actually I think I saw a bit of media coverage of it, and I think Sophie Hagen also tweeted about it at the time. So they did this pilot campaign in the West Midlands and showed that, firstly, it worked. They increased awareness by 22%. But secondly, they identified some issues with the advertising language. So in the pilot, the advert had said that obesity causes cancer, which they've changed to obesity is a cause of cancer. In their FAQ, they explain the change in wording, saying, we had feedback that this wording could make people worry that everyone who is overweight or obese would develop cancer. They also explained that we tested the advertising approach with a broad sample of the public, including cancer patients and people of a range of different weights, and tailored it based on feedback to minimise offence whilst still delivering an important message.
It's definitely a lot more passive, the language, obesity is a cause of cancer.
Yeah.
Is definitely a lot more passive as
probably
as a message.
A bit more accurate as well.
It is more scientifically accurate, yes. They also pointed out that this campaign is not meant to make anyone feel bad about their weight or make anyone think negatively about people who are overweight or obese. This campaign is about raising awareness. We understand that keeping a healthy weight can be difficult, which is why we are calling for the government and food industry to make changes so it is easier for everyone to make healthy choices. We will also measure the impact of the campaign to check if it has any negative effect in this way. Within the FAQ, Cancer Research UK also have some patient questions on obesity and cancer where they talk about BMI. They say BMI is not a perfect measure of body fat. It is a useful guide for most adults. However, it isn't appropriate for certain groups, such as pregnant and breastfeeding women or professional athletes. And they answer the question, I'm overweight and I have cancer. Have I caused it? With information on how to contact their nurse team for support for free, and the point that we would like to be very clear that no one is ever to blame for their cancer. For most people, we don't know what caused it. There are lots of factors that make up your personal risk of cancer. Our risk depends on a combination of our genes, our environment, our age, and factors like whether we smoke or what our weight is.
Yeah, if you're very obese but you've swallowed uranium,
it's probably the uranium that's done it.
It's not going to be the obesity that's going to be the cause of the cancer there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They also answer the question, I'm overweight and I'm really worried I'm going to develop cancer, with being overweight or obese does not mean that you will definitely develop cancer. There are lots of factors that make up your personal risk of cancer. Some things you can't change, like your family history and your age, but there are steps you can take to reduce the risk of cancer. Things like not smoking, eating healthily, cutting down on alcohol and keeping active. And losing weight can also help reduce the risk, especially because eating healthily and moving more reduces cancer risk. It's never too late to make changes, and even small things can add up to a big difference if you do them most days. So personally, I think this campaign is well considered from multiple angles, and it's clear that the view of the charity is not to blame or shame any person for their lifestyle or their body. Similarly to, as we discussed with Brewdog, that doesn't come across from a single advertisement. They are also doing news articles and radio advertising, and I've not heard the radio advertising or things like that. So I don't know how well they're getting the message across in other things, but they're also then doing outreach where they're talking to people on the streets. And are generally quite active about talking people through the science. I don't think it's possible to talk about the science in a simple advertising thing. There has to be the extra information, and they do have the extra information. They have a really detailed, comprehensive website with loads of different articles in different areas of advice on how to maintain a healthy weight. Things like the impact of marketing in people's access to junk food, talking about what policies they want to encourage changing. So they are talking about things from multiple angles, but a single advert in isolation is hard.
Yeah, I mean, from a marketing perspective, that's kind of a double-edged sword to a degree. Is that it's on the one hand you can say, well, we've done all this background research and all this background work and all these other aspects, all these other channels that we're working through. And so if one of those channels is misinterpreted, that's not our fault because we've got all this other stuff behind it. To which the answer to that is usually doesn't matter. You have to assume that everything is seen in isolation and stands on itself.
Of course.
The flip side of it being if what they're saying is true, which I mean, that wasn't if. The flip side being what they're saying is true. And it'd be very easy to, I'm not going to say sugarcoat, but certainly whitewash the effect of carrying more weight than is healthy for one in cancer. And it would be counterproductive to have an advert that didn't convey that effectively enough because you were worried about the people reading it and how they might react to that. Because some people in those situations, a little bit of not shock, but surprise, or even kind of at that moment of being arrested by a piece of information is what you need to make people realise that.
And that's it. The point in this campaign is public awareness. The reason they want public awareness is for it to be an important issue in public consciousness so that they can use it in order to lobby government and food industry changes. But they need for the public to be talking about it in order to do that, because the government don't care about making changes that aren't important to people.
Or are the changes that are more important to more powerful lobby groups like the soft drink and junk food lobby groups. Yeah,
exactly. So from an awareness point of view, I think the adverts do the job. It's a simple message. They've tried to minimise offensive language in the advert. They've changed the language from causes to is a cause of. I don't personally think that the individual adverts are offensive. However, all of that being considered, the campaign does come under a much wider context. We have huge problems across our entire society when it comes to body weight. And first, let's be clear that I am talking about this with a heavy dose of thin privilege. I've talked on the show before about some of the difficulties in body shaming I've encountered when I was particularly slim, but that's absolutely nothing compared to the multi-pronged attack overweight people or even healthy weight people who carry different proportions to the conventional idea of healthy are subjected to in day-to-day life. I've thought a lot about which word to use here. Overweight or obese is the correct medical term when I was talking about the science, because they are scientifically defined terms, even if they are defined using the less than perfect BMI measurement. But when we're talking in a social context, overweight conveys too much kind of judgment that I want to avoid. I know a lot of people prefer the word fat. But as I've never been called fat in a shaming sort of way, I don't feel I'm the right person to reclaim a word that has been historically used in such an insulting way.
Yeah, so that's why you're going to call them the N-word instead.
So I did a shout out on Twitter for people's favourite words to describe their body shape. So I'm going to be using those from here on. I asked for some silly ones, so I apologise if they're a bit too silly. Stigma about body weight is everywhere. We're basically all guilty of it, even if we try not to be. And it starts from an early age. Researchers have even identified negative attitudes towards body weight in 3 to 5 year olds. But it's not just a case of people being mean to chubby fairies. Thank you to Emma A. Harris. The stigma has a much wider impact. Studies suggest that people with a chocolate-filled body type, that one was from Deborah Hyde, are discriminated in the workplace and when applying for work. Research has shown that cuddly people are perceived as less competent, have less leadership potential, and are expected to be less successful. They receive lower starting salaries and are ranked as less qualified. Astonishingly, despite over 35% of adults identified as obese by the World Health Organization, there has been no research into whether obesity has an effect on access to healthcare. However, a paper published in 2015 looking into the literature on the impact of weight bias and stigma on quality of care and outcomes for patients with obesity said many healthcare providers hold strong negative attitudes and stereotypes about people with obesity. There is considerable evidence that such attitudes influence person perceptions, judgment, interpersonal behaviour and decision making. These attitudes may impact the care they provide. Experiences of or expectations of poor treatment may cause stress and avoidance of care, mistrust of doctors and poor adherence among patients with obesity.
I mean, I've had partners who have been suffering from medical problems, and they have specifically avoided going to the doctor. You say, if I go to the doctor, they're just going to tell me to lose weight.
Yeah. They'll tell me it's because I'm overweight. Yeah. That's the cause of the problem.
And I don't think it is the cause of the problem, but they're just going to say, well, lose weight and then come back, and if there's still a problem after that, and that's not the problem, so I'm not even going to bother going.
Yeah.
So that people are specifically avoiding
absolutely
seeking medical care because they just think the doctor's just going to say, well, it's because you're fat, go home.
Yeah.
And it must be tricky because from a doctor's perspective, you'd imagine that is certainly going to be the cause of some things.
And it may it may contribute to problems even if it's not the cause and various other things. But it's not helpful for doctors to be so obviously judgmental, and many are obviously judgmental. So this is what this literature review had said, that many healthcare providers hold strong negative attitudes and stereotypes about people with obesity. It's not just medically informed judgment.
Yeah.
Another study from 2015 showed that negative attitudes to people with Buddha-esque, thanks to Steve Parks, body types are prevalent across the UK, particularly in young male exercise fanatics, #lads. The common theme seems to be that body weight is entirely within a person's control and therefore it's fair game for stigma and judgment. Which, even if that's true, spoiler, it isn't, is a pretty ugly viewpoint. Personally, I strive to support the choice of any individual to make decisions for themselves and their bodies as long as it doesn't detrimentally affect another human being. But is body weight really entirely within our control? Even at first glance, it's easy to debunk this. Everyone knows somebody who is thin as a rake but eats like a gannet. Everybody knows somebody that can eat what they want and not put on weight. And so we know that metabolism changes. We know that there's other factors at play.
Yeah, that was certainly me in my early 20s. Not so much now. Not so much now.
Whereas I look like Al Murray now.
In fact, often there's some weird admiration of slim people, particularly women, who can eat lots of unhealthy food. It's seen as attractive to be able to eat a big greasy burger, but only if you're thin.
Yeah.
If you're not, it's the most repulsive thing you can do in public. Sure, on the most basic level, body weight is regulated by calories in versus calories out, but we know lots of things play a role on each side of the equation. A government report on food poverty in the UK considered the impact of constraints on an individual or household, which might limit choice and therefore have significant consequences. In the report, they discussed that constraints related to affordability, accessibility and availability of foods can lead either to diets which are not nutritionally adequate or diets which are not socially or culturally appropriate.
Not just the availability and affordability of the food, but of the time to go into preparing that food as well.
Exactly.
If you're working 12-hour shifts in a factory, you don't want to come home and spend 3 hours cooking an incredible banquet of healthy food.
And time to go out and do an appropriate level of exercise on in the same note.
Yeah,
exactly, yes. The report pointed out that food affordability can affect job seekers, people with chronic illnesses, people with disabilities, households with children, alone parents, homeless people, members of the traveller community, retirees, renters, single people, and households with a family head with lower educational qualifications, and is affected both by food cost increases and increases in the general cost of living. On accessibility, the report said that often less healthy foods are more readily accessible within walking distance of lower income homes. There are also high numbers of fast food outlets in areas with high deprivation, particularly in urban areas. But also they pointed out that shopping can be difficult with children, for elderly people or people with disabilities and dependent on local infrastructure. People's diet is also affected by their access to cooking facilities, their access to social networks. There was a big thing in this report about people who experience social exclusion often have much poorer diets, and marketing that people are surrounded by. On obesity, the government report said, although it may be an apparent paradox, obesity is more likely in individuals that are food insecure due to squeezed incomes. Healthy and varied diets are unaffordable, and cheaper foods that are palatable, energy dense, and higher in fat and sugar are purchased instead. Evidence from across the USA, Europe, and Australia shows that women with the poorest economic, social, and educational resources are at greatest risk of obesity. The risk of obesity in the UK is 40% higher for benefits recipients, both male and female.
Wow.
And those things obviously feed into each other. You lose your job, struggle to find a new one, put on weight due to food insecurity, but then you're also less employable because of workplace stigma related to body weight.
Yeah.
And that's the key point on this for me, is that although the science is unambiguous on the relationship between obesity and cancer, and I don't think that poster was fat shaming in any sense. It was very clinical, almost in the way it put things across. But
it was stark and it was shocking, but it wasn't fat shaming in my opinion.
But the poster doesn't exist in a vacuum. That poster is on the wall within a culture where fat shaming is commonplace.
A real issue.
And that's something that has to be considered as well. And I think cancer research have considered it, but that
not
hasn't
quite
come across necessarily in all of their marketing material. It's a very, very difficult position for cancer research to be in, and I don't know how you could do that marketing campaign better other than just saying, well, let's not worry about that.
We'll not touch obesity because it's such a difficult issue.
And especially, that the chances that poster, that billboard could have appeared in the tube right next to this fashion poster with a size 0 model.
Of course.
And that comparison, that contextualization.
For me, this is a big thing, is as much as I understand where Sophie Hagen's frustration has come from, levelling it at charities trying to raise awareness of scientific issues is not necessarily useful. Levelling it at society as a whole, other companies that have really big responsibilities in affecting people's self-worth and diet and all sorts of other things, that for me is more important.
I agree, although I can see how you could say levelling that level of ire or attention or frustration at a charity is less useful than levelling it at society as a whole. But society as a whole isn't plastered 12 foot tall on a wall that you can walk past.
No, but it's just as pervasive.
Yeah, but it's not a target. It's too diffuse a target.
That, but there are
targets.
Against?
I'm just raging against society. I'm over here doing a bit of raging against a bit of society.
But there are targets of companies that are responsible, that are much more responsible.
No, I agree.
So those are just a few ways that body weight might be outside of a person's control. There are also illnesses, medications, mental health problems that can all lead to reduced ability to exercise, changes in diet or weight gain. As you said before, Mike, people might not have the energy to exercise or the time to exercise after work, for example.
Well, as I'm sure you remember, I joined a gym. On the show, I said, I've joined a gym, everyone. I've bought shorts. It's brilliant. I packed that in. I didn't have the fucking time.
Of course you didn't.
I did not have the time.
What you want to get is a standing desk with like a little treadmill underneath so you can feel like a proper rodent.
Because especially when work is busy, I'm in the office 12 hours a day, And
then
so
you're knackered and you need to eat. And if you're supposed to be eating a nutritionally healthy, socially acceptable meal, you can't just put Huel in a thing.
Yeah.
You've got to cook a meal with real vegetables rather than, a microwave meal, which is easier and quicker and gets you the calories that you need.
Well, and quite often I'll have a long day at work where I've been in work for, 10, 12 hours. I'll come home, I'm shattered, I'll just order a takeaway and eat and go to bed because that's so much easier than even spending half an hour, with a meal from Blue Apron. This episode sponsored by...
Is that our first sponsor?
No, it's not. Is it fuck?
It's our first sponsor.
Is it bollocks?
It's our first sponsor since we did that advert for inaudible.com.
Of course, a lot of these factors are technically manageable, but when you're dealing with multiple factors, like you've been working 12 hours, you've got to go via a supermarket, which isn't close to where you live, spend money on multiple ingredients to then come home and cook when your kitchen, you might not have all the facilities that you need in order to cook in your home, and then eat it and do the dishes and everything. Like, it all comes in together and it makes it significantly harder to manage those factors.
And it's little things as well. Like if you're on a low income, you might think, well, what we need for this to make the particular meal is I need some garlic and some of this herb over here, and I need some a big thing of olive oil to sort of cook in, and fine, I can use that every time I make a meal. But if you can't afford all those the first time, then you don't have those ingredients. So it's kind of, there is a cycle that you'd end up on because you can't afford to give yourself the leg up to begin with.
At first glance, Sophie's tweet complaining about Cancer Research UK's campaign, which I mentioned many words ago, seemed unnecessarily aggressive and defensive. And at first glance, I was ready to dismiss it as entirely wrong. But actually, there is a point she makes that I think is important to consider. In response to Cancer Research UK's defence of their campaign, she said, "You can absolutely go away in terms of trying to excuse it. Society viewing fatness as a negative thing is a thing that kills more than the cancer that you might get due to maybe something to do with possibly weighing more than a certain weight, possibly maybe." Now, reading her tweets, I think she underplays the role of body weight in health. We know that being over or underweight can cause health problems, and the science is pretty consistent on its link to cancer, albeit with mechanism unknown. But one thing she's right on is the effect of body weight stigma on the health and well-being of people. A summary of the literature published in the American Journal of Public Health in 2010 said stigmatization of obese individuals poses serious risks to their psychological and physical health, generates health disparities, and interferes with implementation of effective obesity prevention efforts. They highlighted that a number of studies have consistently demonstrated that experiencing weight stigma increases the likelihood of engaging in unhealthy eating behaviours and lower levels of physical activity, both of which exacerbate obesity and weight gain. So in addition to weight stigma being bad for your psychological and physical health, it doesn't even encourage or support weight loss.
Yeah, I know Mitch Benn has said on Twitter a few times that if fat people being told they were fat actually helped them lose weight, there would be no fat people because you hear it all the time, every day.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I don't think Cancer Research UK did wrong with this campaign, but within the context of our pretty horrific society when it comes to body weight, I don't think Sophie's totally wrong either. I don't have an answer to this one at all. I guess you'll have to make up your own minds.
So Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub is a week today. That's on March the 15th at our venue, Hoos on Tithe Barn Street. And it's going to be our March Mega Mix, which is going to be a series of mini talks.
We've got some genuinely interesting talks that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
We are going to have
lots of our talks are genuinely interesting anyway.
No, I know, but these are like multiple genuinely really interesting. Me using the word genuinely was not to compare it to other talks. It was to exaggerate how excited I am for those talks.
It sounded like what you were saying was other ones aren't genuinely interesting. You've said they're interesting, but you're just saying that.
Basically, I'm a millennial, so it's like me saying it's literally going to be really good.
It's literally going to be very good, yeah.
It's actually going to be really good.
Also, some of the talks we have at the Mega Mix have been shite in the past. I did one on placebo, so that was fucking tedious.
You did one on the Monty Hall problem as well.
I did do one on the Monty Hall problem, that's true, yeah.
I was thinking about that today. Because I realised I still don't know what the answer is.
Always switch.
Always switch.
Because it's not what I expect it to be.
No, they have access to information you don't have. They will try and trick you, so always switch. Short version.
Yes, that's from 7:30 at Hoos on Tithe Barn Street. So if you're in the Liverpool area, you should come along to that. Also want to plug your blog, Alice.
You got a blog?
I have got a blog. I've changed the domain name now.
You have changed the domain name. It's much easier to remember now. Not that the old domain I thought was poor. The old domain I thought was excellent. It was just a bit lengthy.
I just got it wrong. And then you had to correct me.
Your own domain name. So your new blog, what's the address for your new blog?
dralice.blog.
dralice.blog. Then that's easy enough to remember.
Much easier, much better.
Although I now have the problem that when people ask me, when I give talks and after the talk, people say, where can I find more information? After I told them about the blog, they're like, I just want to write it down because I missed it on the slide or whatever. I say it out loud and they're like, is that it? I thought there was more to it. They're waiting for me to say more.
Waiting for it to stick a .com on the end of it, basically.
Yeah.
You know, no, it's literally just dralice.blog. So go to Alice's blog. Go and subscribe to Alice's blog.
My most recent post is completely seasonally pointless. Like, it's a post on basically on why you should use sunscreen. Although, why you should use sunscreen even in winter. But it's not very seasonal.
Well, I thought what I found interesting is that it wasn't the blog post directly. although the blog post was interesting.
Was it genuinely interesting, though?
It was. I literally found it interesting. What I didn't know was I saw a conversation you had with Trucker Tango on Twitter, where he'd said, well, I'll just stay indoors all the time. And you were like, UVA can get through glass and makes you age anyway. So you don't burn through glass, which I knew.
Yeah.
But you can have the aging effects.
You can have the aging
UV
effects and the increased cancer risk through glass.
Which I thought was interesting. And
I didn't mention it in the blog at all because it wasn't necessarily relevant to the blog post, but
slightly annoying because my desk is right by a window.
Yeah,
my desk's also in Liverpool.
Shit.
Even in non-sunny areas, you should be wearing sun cream, really. But I watched an interesting documentary about it recently, actually, from Cherry Healey on the BBC. I really like her, but she'd done. There was a TV show about beauty stuff, and she talked about some of the things that I talked about in my blog post, but she'd specifically spoken to a bus driver, a woman who had driven buses for decades, and they did some assessment of aging on her skin using proper the scientific tests for those things, and had shown how much worse the aging was on the side of her skin that was exposed to the sunlight through the window of the bus, because it can make such a big difference.
Wow.
So you can find out more about it on my blog.
Dr.
Not about that specific bit, but
about stuff.
Aside from that, then, is all we have time for.
Yeah, I think so.
All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Cheers.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.